thank you all for coming out. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is my first time in your neck of the woods, and so far it's been just wonderful. So the title of my talk tonight is The Morality of Self-Interest and Why You Need It. So before we get into the morality of self-interest, let's start with a broader question. What is morality, and do you need morality? Because if we don't need morality, if you don't need this thing, then you don't need it. We could just go have some cocktails or something. Because if we don't need this thing, there's no point in spending any time sweating it or talking about it or contemplating any of these ideas. So what exactly is morality? And why do we need it? Or do we need it? And if so, why? What is the big deal here? Now, what is morality? It's a code of values and principles to guide your choices and actions in life. Right? And this is true of any morality, whether it's the morality that you maybe learned from church, or the morality you learned from your parents, or morality that's thrust on you from maybe a government, or whatever. That's the whole purpose of morality, is that it's supposed to be a set of values and or principles to tell you, in effect, how you should act. What's right, what's wrong, what you should and shouldn't do. So the first question here is, do we need this thing? Do you need any code of values to help you think about what's right and wrong in life? Because if we don't, again, then there's no point in talking about this. Now, an interesting fact about this is that you actually have a morality right there in your head, whether you are consciously aware of it or not. We all have a morality, and the reason is because we do need this thing. And we can tell that we need it by just observing some of the kinds of questions that we ask ourselves in life. So should I study for the test, or cheat on it, or forget about it? Don't worry about it, right? This kind of a question might go through your head. Is homosexuality immoral or moral, or is it okay? What's the deal with that? Is environmentalism a good movement, a bad movement? Not so much. What? All of these are moral terms: good, bad, should, shouldn't. How should I choose a career? Should I choose a career? And if so, what's the process there? Should I choose the career that my mother and father want me to go into? Or should I look at my own interests and choose a career that way? Well, that would be a little selfish to do that. Maybe I should do what my parents tell me and not be selfish, right? So we have in our mind a code of values of some kind already. We're always working with that. We're always operating with that, whether we really are conscious of the fact or not. And the reason that we have that is because we do need it. Human beings do a lot of thinking about what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, and what we should and shouldn't do. And the reason we do this kind of thinking is because we have the faculty of free will. We can actually choose to act one way or another. Right? If we didn't have that faculty, then there would be no need of morality. Right? Take a tiger. A tiger's running around the jungle, and he's not thinking about what should I do this afternoon, right? He's just driven by instinct. And he's got this automatic code of values which tells him you need to eat, and you need to get shelter, and you need shade from the sun, and a few other things. But this is just an automated set of values that is in the tiger's head. And this is true of all non-volitional animals, so animals that do not have this faculty of choice that we have. But because we have the faculty of choice and the ability to reason and to think about what we're going to do, and to think long range about how we want to act and what we want to make of our lives, we need some kind of a code of values to help us make these decisions. Because they're really big decisions in life, right? The career that you choose, you're going to be working the vast majority of your life, your waking hours at least. And so that's a really big decision. And you need to make that decision in the right way. Like if you choose the wrong career, it's just going to make your life miserable. And if you befriend the wrong people, if you befriend people who are dishonest and unjust and tricky about that fact, so you might not know it if you didn't do due diligence in your relationship, that can really lead to problems. Or if we vote in politicians into office who are then going to set the laws and rule the land in effect, and we do that without thinking through it morally, Are these good people or bad people? Who are we electing here? So we do need a code of values. There's just no getting around this. The only question is, do we choose our code of values consciously and deliberately? Right? Do we do the thinking and the due diligence to figure out, is this the right code of values? Or do we just kind of accept a code of values by osmosis from the culture? Or do whatever we were raised to do? If we were told by our parents, don't be selfish, put others first. Has anybody heard that? That's been a part of your life at some point or another? Don't be shy, I think it's all right. So we hear this stuff, and we hear it from probably our parents, no doubt from whoever our religious leaders are, and we get it in the media, and we get it in art, in movies and books, right? And it's sort of rained on us, this idea that you shouldn't be selfish, you should put others first. And the name of this moral code is altruism. Altruism comes from the Greek root alter, which means other. And so it's otherism. It's the idea that you should put other people first. That's what altruism means. And what it really means is that you, in positive, so if you should put other people first, it means you should not put yourself first, right? Don't be selfish. Don't put yourself first. Your life is not that important. Other people's lives are important. Yours, not so much, right? Now, this is the morality that almost all of us are raised with. I certainly was raised with this. My father's an Episcopal minister, and in the Christian church, and he, relatively good man. I have no beef with my dad, other than this minor thing that he raised me to think that I should never put myself first or never care about my own life. He's gotten better later in life, I have to say, but we can talk about that later. But almost all of us really are raised with this idea that we should put other people first. But think about this. What if you take that seriously? What if you really take this idea seriously, that you should put other people first, and you should do what other people want, and be subservient to other people's desires and will? I mean, what would your life be if you really took that seriously? If you really did not think about what's good for your life and think about a career that would fulfill you and give you meaning in life. If instead you were just deferring to other people all the time, what should I do next? What do you want? What can I do for you? Always sacrificial, always sacrificing for others, giving up your time, your thought, your life in bits and pieces to other people. Because this is what a sacrifice is. A sacrifice is giving up a greater value for you for the sake of a lesser value to you. Right? You might want a career as a musician, but your mother wants you to be a lawyer. So, altruism would say, well, don't be selfish. Don't go choose a career as a musician. That would be selfish. Be selfless. Sacrifice. Give up that value for this one, right? That's what this code tells us to do. Now, almost nobody takes altruism seriously, in the sense that they literally try to live by it all the time. But what happens if you accept a moral code as true in your mind, and then you regularly and repeatedly act against what that code tells you to do? In other words, you act in a way that you think is immoral, and you do that regularly. What effect would that have on you? Would you feel guilt regularly? Yeah, I mean, you would feel like, damn, I'm not living up to my moral code. I'm not being the kind of person that I should be. So even if you don't act on this moral code in any consistent or regular manner, if you accept it as true and then act against it, it has this horrible effect on your soul. It makes you feel like a bad person, like you're not worthy of success and happiness in life. So there's a real problem with this moral code of altruism. It doesn't really make sense. And there's an interesting question that the American philosopher Ayn Rand asks about this moral code of altruism, this idea that we should self-sacrificially serve others. And the question is just a single word. Why? Why should you self-sacrificially serve others? What's the reason? Are there any facts in reality that give rise to this idea? Are there any facts that we can point to? Well, if you don't live for others, then you won't be happy. Well, that's not true. That seems to be the opposite of true. Well, if you don't sacrifice for others, the world will fall apart in some way. Well, that's not true. Pursuing your values doesn't make the world fall apart in some way. So there's something really wrong here, it seems. And so Ayn Rand took a different approach to morality. And her approach was to ask a really fundamental question. And that is the question that I began with tonight. What is morality and why do we need it? But then she went even deeper than that. She got a little bit more narrow than that and went deeper at the same time. And she asked, instead of just what is morality, she figured out, well, morality is a code of values to guide your choices and actions again. And that's true of all moralities. She focused on this word values, which is right in the centerpiece of that definition of morality, a code of values. And then she asked, well, what are values and why do we need them? And this is a really interesting question, because this takes our thinking about morality and it helps us to veer away from all of the traditional moralities and the traditional ideas on this subject that we were raised with, right? That our parents pushed on us, or our preachers pushed on us, or somebody pushed on us, that we got from the media. It helps to focus our mind away from that and instead toward the facts of reality. Either we need values or we don't, right? If we don't need them, again, there's no point in thinking about it. We can just forget about it and go have a cocktail. So the question of what are values and why do we need them starts to help us burrow down into reality and start looking at facts to support a moral code, rather than just tradition or common opinion or the like. So let's follow Ayn Rand's thinking on this a little bit. I'm going to give you sort of a short indication of the way that she thought through this process. And it's fascinating because, has anyone heard of the is-ought dichotomy? Or the fact-value dichotomy? There's this idea in the history of philosophy called the fact-value dichotomy. And it's the idea that you can't derive values from facts. You can't get oughts, or principles about how we ought to act, moral principles, from the facts of reality, from what is. You can't get moral principles from observable facts. And this is why almost everyone thinks, well, to get morality, you've got to have religion. Right? You have to have faith in a God, and the God gives us morality, right? And this is one of the reasons that idea is so strong in people's minds, is because of what's known as the is-ought dichotomy. The idea, well, you can't get moral principles from reality and from observation and logic, so you got to get them from revelation and faith. There's just no other place to get them. That's the idea. But Ayn Rand blew this dichotomy up, because she showed us how we can get morality from facts. She proved, she gave this demonstrable proof of how values are drawn from observation and logic. And here's how she did it. She says, what are values and why do we need them? And then she looks out at reality and she says, well, what does this concept of value mean in the real world? All right, well, you value money. Does anybody here not value money? Right? This is something we value. There's no question that this is what this term has to mean. You pursue money, you go after money, you get a job or whatever, and you might be a bank robber, you might go after money that way, right? You could go after money in an illegitimate way, but you're still valuing it in the sense that you're going after it, right? You value good grades. You work, you act toward good grades, you act to gain and keep good grades. You value good relationships, right? You want good friends and you want maybe a good romantic partner. You value these things. What does it mean to value things? It means to go after them. It means to act, to gain, or keep something. That's what a value is. And this is just a generic sort of very straightforward definition of value. It's something you act to gain or keep. And the interesting thing about values is that human beings are not the only things that pursue values. I mentioned a tiger earlier. Tigers pursue values. They go after antelope, right? And they seek shade. And rabbits pursue values, and mice and other animals pursue values. Not only that, plants pursue values. What does a tree do with its leaves? It goes up. It seeks what? Sunlight. and it shoots its roots down into the ground. It's acting to gain and keep something. It's acting to gain and keep minerals and water and sunlight so that it can use those for something. So value is that which one acts to gain or keep. And this is not just human beings. This is broader than human beings. This is living things in general. So, and then she asked, well, okay, that's what a value is. Now, why do we need them? Do we need these things in our lives? Well, what happens if you don't pursue values? What happens if you don't pursue money or an education or career or friendships? You would, I mean, if you didn't pursue any values, not even food, you would just wither away and die, right? And this is true of other animals too. If for some reason a tiger can't catch the antelope, or the rabbit can't find anything to eat, or whatever, the animal is going to die. So what Rand observed is that living things pursue values, and only living things pursue values, like a rock or a hammer doesn't go after anything. And then she asked, well, why do they pursue values? What ultimately is at stake? What difference does it make whether a thing achieves its values or not? And this is where the rubber really meets the road. What she realized is that only living things pursue values, and the reason that they pursue them is so that they can live. Values are objects that living things go after so that they can live. And this is true of all living things. It's true of all things that pursue values. So we're now at this point where we actually have identified a factual basis for this idea of values, the central idea in morality. This is a really big deal, because this means that we've anchored our thinking about morality in a fact of reality, the requirements of life. Now, when it comes to human beings, we pursue our values. Why? I'm saying that we pursue them to live. But there's an interesting thing about us. We can also act against our life, right? We have volition. We have free will. Human beings, uniquely, can commit suicide, or at least do so consciously. There are some animals that kill themselves, but they don't, or we do it, but we can do it volitionally. There are some animals that do it instinctually, and there's some kind of spider that kills itself. And I don't think that lemmings actually run over the cliffs, but you get the idea. There are these animals that take self-destructive action. We can do that by choice, right? You can choose to shoot heroin into your veins and become a vegetable. You can choose to sit around and do nothing and let your life, all of your hours and days go by. You can even choose to kill yourself. I mean, and then you're done. It's over. So this idea of free will, this capacity to choose our values, sets us apart from the other animals in a certain respect, because it means that we don't automatically pursue our life-serving values. We can pursue things and go after things that are not good for our life. This is what, incidentally, altruism tells you to do. It tells you to give up the things that are good for your life and pursue the things that are not, because you're not supposed to be selfish. But here's the interesting thing about it. There's no reason to make sacrifices. There's no reason to pursue things that are not good for your life. There's only a reason to pursue things that are good for your life. And that reason is a wonderful life. That reason is to make your life the best it can be. On this model of morality, on this idea that the purpose of morality is to pursue the values that will make your life wonderful, that will fill your days and years with wonderful career, with wonderful friendships, with a wonderful romance, hopefully and there is a part of this morality that supports this, hopefully under a free society so that you're not enslaved by a government or by a culture that wants to mistreat you, either because you're a woman or because you're a minority or because you're a businessman or any other reason, right? So there's a way in which this morality upholds a free society and respect for individual rights. And please ask me about that in the Q&A, because I don't want to get into that in the meat of the talk here. But the principle of individual rights and a free society follows from this morality in a really interesting way. But I want to talk a little bit more now about the nature of this morality, because all I've given you so far is how is it that we're deriving this idea of values from reality? How is it that morality and this idea that you should pursue the things that are good for your life, what does that mean in practice? So altruism, I'm going to contrast this with altruism because it really helps to bring out the picture here. Altruism tells you one thing, and it really tells you only one thing. It tells you to sacrifice, to give up your values for other people. According to altruism, being moral consists in self-sacrificially serving others. So, for instance, if you're Mother Teresa and you've given up any career that might have made you happy and instead you've gone to Calcutta and you're going to wash the feet of the poor, and not necessarily do this because you love doing it, but because you feel like you should do it, because you should sacrifice, you should be selfless, all right? So you're serving other people, or Mother Teresa was serving other people in that capacity. But there's another person that serves other people, another kind of person that we need to contrast here. And that is, say, Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs, okay, or some business person who has made an enormously valuable product, and he has sold it to people and has served them in that sense. So he's serving people. But there's a difference between the way that he serves people and the way that Mother Teresa serves people. Right? She is serving in a selfless way. She's giving up values and not gaining values in the process. It's just a sacrifice. When someone like Jeff Bezos sells you a value, something off of Amazon, whether a book or a shirt or whatever, he's not giving up something for nothing. He's giving you a value, and you're trading a value in exchange, right? And so it's value for value. Both of you are getting values. You're both gaining, right? So there's a big difference here between sacrificing values and making trades. And that's a really important distinction, because otherwise you're going to think that Mother Teresa and Jeff Bezos have the same kind of moral code going on here, and they don't. There's a difference between those two, and it's really important. Now, whether Bezos accepts the moral code that I'm advocating is the secondary point. But the fact is that he's gaining values when he's giving these values to people in exchange for money. So back to altruism for a second. It tells you to do this one thing and one thing only, and that is to sacrifice. There's no other guidance in altruism. It does not tell you how to choose a career other than don't choose one that's selfish. It doesn't tell you how to choose your friends other than don't be selfish about that either. It doesn't tell you how to choose a lover, only to say don't be selfish in that regard. Can you imagine choosing a lover without any concern for your own needs or your own interests or what's going to make your life great? Some people do that. There are women who get together with a guy and the guy beats her, yet she stays with him. This is self-sacrificial. Well, he needs me. He beats you. Well, but I don't want to be selfish about this. This is the kind of thinking that if you take this idea seriously, this is what it leads to. It doesn't make any sense. And it's just this one idea, sacrifice, give up your values. Here's what egoism tells you to do, the morality of self-interest, which is also called egoism. It doesn't just tell you that values are the things you go after to gain and keep. That's just the very basics. It then follows up with, okay, well, what would that entail? What does it mean to make your life great? What does it mean to fill your life with values that will make you happy? Okay, well, we need to understand what thing. Now we have a mission, right? We have this big mission to make our life the best life it can be. And we got to figure out what's involved in that. So the morality of self-interest fills in the gaps. It says, right, your most important value is your mind. Because your mind is how you figure out what's true in reality. It's how you figure out what will make your life great. So you have to respect your mind more than anything. It's the most important of all of your values, is your own judgment. Now, this is really powerful because we're constantly told when we're growing up, particularly if you're in any kind of an authoritarian type environment, whether your parents are sort of bossy parents who tell you what you have to do all the time, or whether you're in a culture where that's the case, and or if you're in a church where you're told, well, you must do this, this is the way you have to be moral, don't you be selfish, et cetera, et cetera. This idea that I'm talking about, that you should use your mind and your judgment and that comes first, that's completely contrary to that. That says, no, No authority is going to tell me how to live my life. I'm going to think about what's good for me. I'm going to use my mind. I'm going to use my judgment. And I'm going to make decisions on that basis. This is really, really fundamental stuff. This changes everything. You putting your judgment first. Another thing that egoism tells you is that you need purpose in life. You need purpose. You need goals, long-term goals, and you need to think about what kinds of relationships you want to have, what kind of career you want to have, where you want to live, what kinds of things you want to purchase. If you want to buy a summer home someday, where are you going to get, what kind of clothes will make you happy and feel good about yourself? From little things like clothing and choices like that to huge things like your career and all of the sort of bigger, broader, more conceptual values, egoism tells you there's a certain way to think about that. Choose what's important to you in life. Be methodical about this. What kind of friends do I want? I want friends that like the same kinds of things I like, that I can hang out with, who treat me well and are honest, right? Egoism tells you to find those kinds of friends. It tells you to think seriously and clearly, not only about your career, but about the way you spend your recreational time. We live once. Every moment that passes is gone forever, and we can't get it back. It's gone. So your time in life is super important. And what egoism tells you to do is take that seriously. Make your life awesome. Fill it with the values that are going to make you feel good, make you happy, and fulfill your life. It says nothing about harming. It doesn't say harm other people. It doesn't say be mean to people. There's nothing about this. People think, well, egoism, doesn't that mean being mean to people? No. Making your life great doesn't require being mean to people. There's no correlation there at all. Making your life great, in fact, it requires you to be really thoughtful about the way that you judge people, and to judge, people who are good and nice and also virtuous, honest and just, to judge them a certain way. And sure, egoism does tell you to judge people who are dishonest and unjust and horrible, to judge them accordingly, right? Judgment is a really important thing. If you don't judge people, you're going to find yourself in all sorts of bad relationships. So egoism holds up the principle of justice, which is the virtue of judging people rationally and treating them accordingly. This gives you good relationships and keeps you out of bad ones, right? Another thing that egoism tells you that you need is self-esteem. You can't function in this world if you think you're no good. If you think you're not capable of dealing with the world, or that you don't deserve happiness, you're just going to feel gross, and you're not going to get things done. So egoism recognizes this fact and says, look, self-esteem is a really important aspect of human life. We need to feel good about ourselves so that we can function properly in the world. We need to believe that we can succeed, and we need to believe that we're worthy of success. Well, how do you acquire self-esteem? You can't just tell yourself, I'm great. So what do? You have to think, and you have to pursue values, and you have to demonstrate to yourself that you can pursue and achieve values. And by doing that, you also tell yourself that you're worthy of these values because you made the effort to get them. So this is a really important aspect of this moral philosophy too, that what happens when you start to use your mind and your own judgment and achieve things, is you start to feel really good about yourself. It's like, oh my goodness, I can succeed in this world. I can make things happen, I can gain values, I can have good relationships, I can have a wonderful career. So these are just the values of the philosophy. I haven't even I touched on the virtues a little bit, but reason, purpose, and self-esteem are the three, what Ayn Rand called the cardinal values of the objectivist ethics, or the morality of egoism. The cardinal values, because all three of them are absolutely crucial to your life. Reason, your mind, thinking, purposes, the things you want to go after, the things that are really important to you, and self-esteem, this confidence that you gain from pursuing values and achieving them. But egoism doesn't stop there. It goes on to give you a whole series of virtues, right? Values are things you go after, or assets that you have, like reason, purpose, and self-esteem. Virtues are the actions you take to gain the things that make your life great. So the virtues in the objectivist ethics include rationality, which is the use of reason, and I won't focus much on that because I've basically already touched it. Honesty, the refusal to fake reality or to pretend that facts are other than they are in order to gain values. And integrity, which is the commitment to acting on rational principles as a matter of course, and rational principles being principles that you understand with your own mind and that make sense to you. If some ideas don't make sense to you, you shouldn't uphold them. You should say, wait, I don't want to uphold things that don't make sense. And there are several other virtues. I want to focus on honesty and integrity and justice because I think that they'll be most helpful here. I've already talked a little bit about reason, and I've talked about purpose to some extent. The idea that you need, you need goals to go after, and a career would fit into that. We can talk if you want to ask about career because it's a really big deal in the objectivist ethics. We can talk about that in the Q&A. But honesty is a really interesting virtue in the objectivist ethics because the normal approach to honesty, and you've probably heard this before, is just don't lie. Lying is wrong. It's wrong to lie. Well, I mean, there's kind of truth to that, but why? What is it about lying that's wrong? And is that the fundamental problem with this thing? What if an axe murderer knocks on your door and wants to know if there are other people in the house, and you have a bunch of friends upstairs, and he's looking to kill a bunch of people? Are you supposed to say, yeah, my buddies are upstairs? Or there are all sorts of scenarios where telling a lie would be a perfectly rational and value-keeping thing to do, right? Take a more realistic situation. What if the Gestapo comes to your door and wants to know if there are Jews in your attic or anywhere in your house, right? I mean, these kinds of things happen. And fortunately, a lot of times when that kind of thing happened, the people who answered the door said, no, nobody here, even though somebody might have been up in the attic, right? So telling a lie is not necessarily a bad thing to do. There's got to be a context here. Well, what Ayn Rand figured out is that the virtue of honesty isn't about whether or not you tell a lie. That's kind of a trivial way to look at it. The virtue of honesty is about being true to reality. It's about keeping your mind connected to the facts. It's about not pretending that facts are other than they are, right? If somebody comes to my door and wants to know if I have a safe in the house, and he's trying to rob me, and I say no, even though there's a safe back there, I'm telling him a lie, but who's being dishonest here, me or him? He's being dishonest. He's pretending that the money that belongs to me somehow belongs to him when it doesn't. I'm not pretending anything. I'm recognizing the fact that A, he's a robber, B, that money is mine, and several other facts that he's ignoring. So I'm not the one evading reality or pretending. He is. My lie is just a way to deal with that fact. So you see, there's a way that you can think about virtues that aren't just like somebody told you must do this, but rather you can think about virtues in the sense of what makes sense for human life, right? If human life is the standard of value, what we should do is pursue things that will fill our lives with joy and happiness and wonderful relationships and freedom and all of these things. You can think about virtues that way. And then all of this is anchored in the facts of reality and the requirements of human life. It doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from society. It's not a matter of opinion. Morality comes from reality. It comes from the requirements of our life and happiness. And so when you understand this moral code, you can lose the moral code that tells you to sacrifice. You can give that up so that you don't have to feel rotten all the time about not living up to your moral code. You can instead pursue values, refuse to sacrifice, befriend people who are good for your life, who treat you well and who you like. Pursue a career that will fill your life with joy. Spend your time in a way that's productive for you. The other virtues, I think I mentioned integrity. Integrity is walking your talk. Well, you can't walk your talk if your talk is about how you should sacrifice all the time. You'll die. You can't do that. But you can walk your talk if your morality says, pursue your values, don't sacrifice. Always try to make the best decisions you can based on your own judgment for your long-term success and happiness in life. You can do that consistently. You can do that as a matter of absolute consistency through the entirety of your life. which means that you're living up to your moral code, and your moral code makes your life great. This is just wonderful, and this changes everything. This changes what Ayn Rand did, and I'm just barely scratching the surface of this. We only have an hour here, and I want to have time for a Q&A, so I'm not going to go on much longer here, but I want to just stress what this moral code is and what it means. This is not just some made-up thing. It's derived from observation and logic. And you can understand it with your own mind that this is true. And I'm not saying you should, right now you're already like, oh yeah, I'm sold on this. You need to think about this. This is a big deal. And if any ideas do not make sense to you, you shouldn't accept them, including this morality. If it doesn't make sense, don't accept it. One of the principles of this morality is the virtue of independence, which holds that you should never go by anybody's judgment except your own. The judgment of your mind is the most important aspect of your life. Independent thinking is essential, so you shouldn't accept ideas that don't make sense to you. You should only accept them if they do. But if you look into this moral code and you think it does make sense, beyond what I'm telling you tonight, then you have this wonderful thing ahead of you. You can live the rest of your life with a moral code that both makes sense, that's great for your life, and you can tell your friends about it, share it with them, and everybody prospers from this. So, back to the title of this talk tonight, The Morality of Self-Interest and Why You Need It. I don't want to go on much longer, but I think it's clear enough at this point that if what I'm saying is true, if you look into this, and there's more evidence to support this than what I've given you, and you look into it, it really makes sense, I think you can see why you need this. It's the only morality out there that's really good for your life and that makes sense to your mind. That's great. That's a really beautiful thing. And please ask me about, and it doesn't have to be the first question, but please ask me about how this relates to freedom and individual rights, because there's a really interesting link here that I think you'll find helpful. So with that, I will call it for Q&A. Yes. So what about the joy that you get from giving presents to people or giving things away? That is one of the great joys in life, is it not? Right? When you have a friend or a lover or your children, and sometimes even strangers, doing things for other people can really make you feel good. But it doesn't have to be a sacrifice to do things for others, right? What happens when you have a really good friend and you buy him or her a really nice birthday present? Are you getting anything from this, or is this just a sacrifice? Are you just giving something away and there's no return at all? Now, I'm not saying a material return necessarily. Is there any spiritual return in it? Is there anything about your mind and your soul and your values that you gain something from this? Yeah, it's your friend, right? It makes your friend is someone you love in a certain regard. It's someone who matters to you, and his or her happiness matters to you. That's what it means for the person to be a friend, right? Now that's an easier one because it's your friend. So you probably are thinking also about, well, what about strangers? What about when you do things for strangers? Well, this is where it gets a bit tricky. You have to really be careful, because doing things for strangers sometimes feels really good, and it can be completely egoistic. For instance, if I hold a door for somebody, and I did that coming in here tonight, I held a door for some person, I didn't know her at all. She walked in, she said, "Thank you." I said, "You're welcome," and I walked in, and it was done. What happened there? Was I being sacrificial? Was I giving up a greater value for the sake of a lesser value? No. As a human being who holds human life as the standard of value, I love people. My default toward other people is, you're probably a really good person. Why do I think that? Because most people are. Most people are producers. They try to produce values. They try to be honest. They try to be nice to people unless they have some reason not to be nice to them. If you hold human life as your standard of value, you care about people. That's the default. The only time you wouldn't care about someone at all is if you had some real reason. First of all, if you didn't know him and you're not even seeing him. There are people outside on the quad right now who, I don't care about them in the sense, I don't even know who they are. Do I have a sort of a broad care for them? Yeah. If they're good people, I care that I hope they're having a wonderful life. I mean, I care about them that way. I don't care about them in the sense that I'm going to go out there and start giving them money, okay, or giving them presents. So there's a different level of care that you have for a friend or someone who's in your life versus a complete stranger. But one of the great things about living in a civilized society where people's rights are protected and where we all sort of are like, hey, let's all have a wonderful life in this environment of peace and prosperity, is that you kind of have this feeling about, look, people are good. It's nice to be around other people. So you hold doors for other people, or you say please and thank you and these kinds of things. Not because it's a duty to other people or because you're sacrificing, but because it's good for your life. It's better to live in an environment where people treat each other humanely and nicely. So there's all sorts of things that we do for other people that are materially and or spiritually really important to us. By the way, egoism is not a materialistic moral code, and objectivism is not a materialistic philosophy. It doesn't hold that we're just meat in motion, you know. No, you have a mind, you have a soul. Your soul is the values that you've chosen in life and the things that matter to you. Those are conceptual things. Those are ideas, and that's what it means to have a soul or a spirit. And I know religion has sort of got a monopoly on these terms, it seems. And anytime somebody talks about being, spirituality or something like that, it's like, oh, are you being religious? There's a secular way of looking at this. Your spirit is your chosen values, the things that matter to you, and they're real. They're not physical. They're in here. They're in our mind. They're ideas, but they're real. And so there's a whole lot to this philosophy. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because there's a whole lot to this philosophy that that fleshes out a beautiful life in a way that's not obvious, and it answers a lot of these kind of seemingly tough questions, like, what about other people, and what about doing things for others who you care about? So thank you. Great question. Yes?
Hello. If, for example, I'm a marketer who needs to promote or make an advertisement for a product or some service, which truly service or product is not that good, but this is my self-interest because I will gain profit and the company will gain profit. So I will be benefited from manipulating and lying at people and presenting the product as better as it is actually. What is like the connection between the self-interest and the deception or the manipulation that you could exercise over those target customers, for example?
Excellent question. Did everybody hear that? Loud enough here, over here? Yes? Okay. So there are two different ways to look at this. I'm going to look at it at just the moral level, and then we'll look at, first we'll look at it at the legal level, okay? So if you tell someone, let's say I want to sell somebody my used car, okay? And I go, I tell the person, yeah, it's only got 60,000 miles on it, and I want $10,000 for it. And he goes, oh, great, that sounds like a good deal. He kicks the tires, takes it for a drive, and he buys the car for $10,000, and he drives off. But unbeknownst to him, I have set the odometer back. It's actually got 160,000 miles on it, and he doesn't know that. So I've defrauded him. This is called fraud, and it's illegal under all legitimate legal systems because it's a violation of somebody's rights. You have taken something from somebody and given them something that is not what they bargained for, right? He is not driving in the car that he bargained for. He bargained for a car with 60,000 miles on it, and I gave him a different one. So I've defrauded him, and that is illegal, and it's properly illegal. But let's talk about this in the more difficult kind of context, which is, let's say you're working for a marketing company, so this is the kind of idea I think you have in mind. And you don't personally believe in this product. You think that they're exaggerating the value of this thing. Maybe it's a weight loss pill. And they're saying, yeah, if you take this pill, you'll lose 10 pounds a month, right? And you've experimented with it yourself, and it's like, this thing doesn't really work the way that they're advertising it, okay? So now you're in this situation where you're marketing this thing that you personally really don't believe in, and there's There's not necessarily a way for this to be portrayed as outright fraud. Maybe there's no way to prove that what they're saying isn't true, but you don't think it's true, right? So then you're profiting on this idea and this action that you don't believe in. Well, here's the reason why this is not good for you. And I think you've already kind of figured it out to some extent. It's not good for you and your life because it's going to make you feel bad. It's going to make you feel bad because you know it's wrong. You know that it's wrong to tell people something and to give them something on that pretense, right? Now, the reason it's wrong is to some extent a matter of us just understanding the causal way in which human relationships and the world works, right? We understand that if somebody did that to us, it would make us feel horrible and that it would really hurt our lives if we were defrauded all the time. So there's a reciprocal sort of self-interested internal thought process you can go through to see that there's something wrong with this. You just turn it back on yourself and you can see that there's something wrong with it. But there's more, because it's not just the case that it's wrong because it would make you feel bad, or it's wrong because this person is maybe not getting what he or she bargained for. It's wrong because it's faking reality, and what happens when you fake reality once is it opens the floodgate for you to fake reality as a matter of course. It violates a principle that you know to be true, which is that facts are what they are, right? That things are what they are, and you're pretending that that's not true. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you start pretending that things are other than they are, then you have already made yourself and basically admitted to yourself that this is the kind of person you are. You're the kind of person who will do that. Well, if you know that you're the kind of person who will do that kind of thing, this is going to have the same kind of effect on you that trying to uphold altruism would have when you can't uphold it and you don't uphold it. It's going to make you feel guilty. And that guilt is really destructive. It's not only going to make you feel guilty, it's also going to lead to more pretense. And if you start to pretend and you do more pretending, what ends up happening is that faking reality catches up with you, and it catches up with you in myriad ways. In a book that I wrote about the objectivist ethics, I go through a long process of showing what happens to someone as soon as they start to pretend that facts are other than they are. And what happens is he's admitted to himself that this is the kind of person he is by doing it the first time. And then by doing it a second time, he's continued it. And he keeps going and going and going. And sooner or later, what happens, and you guys probably all know, almost everybody here probably knows somebody who's kind of serially dishonest. And what happens is they lose their friends, they can't keep a job, their life starts to fall apart. And the reason it starts to fall apart is because you can't try to live in reality, the realm of values, by faking reality, the realm of values. The place we get values from is reality. And if we start to pretend that that realm is something other than it is, we put ourselves at war with that realm. So the one act there might not seem like a big deal. If somebody says, I don't really believe in this thing, I think it's kind of fraudulent, but I'm going to go ahead and keep marketing it. As soon as you do that, you start to feel bad about yourself, and you step onto a slope that says, this is the kind of person I'm going to be. And that just, it rolls and catches up with you both materially, in your life with other people, and your job. If you're working for a company that's doing that, and you know it, then you already think that this company is being dishonest. So now you think your boss is dishonest, yet you're going to stay in a company where you don't know if anything your boss tells you next could be a lie, right? You don't have any idea. The guy has already demonstrated that he's no good, right? So you're already in this horrible position. So this is an excellent question, and it's probably the most difficult question you could have asked me, because it's the question that's not as obvious to answer as the others. But if you think through it, if you think about what does it mean to act against what you know is true, what does that do to you internally? And then what does that do down the line if you keep doing that kind of thing? Now, some people might do something like that and they go, whoa, I shouldn't have done that. And then they self-correct. So if anybody in here has done something that you think is wrong, it doesn't mean that you're forever going to be that kind of person. You can choose at any time to, hey, I don't want to be that kind of person anymore. Instead, I'm going to be the kind of person who has a code of values that makes sense so that I don't have to violate it. and then I'm going to be consistent to it. And that's the great thing about egoism, is it enables you to do that. So what do I recommend, and then I'll move to another question, what do I recommend in a situation like that? If you find yourself in a situation like that, I do spend a couple hours maybe thinking through the whole process, make sure you're really right about what you're thinking about, or at least that you really think that this is a fraudulent kind of situation, or at least it's an unethical situation, and then get out, try to find a job someplace else where you can be proud to work. Pride is one of the objectivist virtues, by the way. Ayn Rand calls it moral ambitiousness. I love that term. It's the idea that I want to be really good and I'm going to be ambitious about this. I'm going to make being good, taking care of myself, my soul, my life in general, I'm going to make this a priority. So I don't do things that I think are wrong because it will ruin my life in time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
So you're saying that we should live life in order to do what's best for us and be happy at the end. Does it mean that an altruistic person lives a miserable life? For example, Mother Teresa, she was altruistic, but she means she was miserable.
Interesting thing about Mother Teresa, I'll focus on her and then I'll broaden the question. Mother Teresa was miserable, and this is a known fact. She wrote about it she had a journal. And Christopher Hitchens, anybody know about Christopher Hitchens? He's a late journalist who was a really incisive thinker. He wrote a book about Mother Teresa and about how miserable she was and about how dishonest she was, by the way. She was an extremely dishonest woman. And she's not known for this, but you have to, if you dig into her life, you discover this. And the book by Hitchens is called The Missionary Position. Kind of an irreverent title, but that's Hitchens for you. But I advocate reading that. It's a very short book. It's only like this thick. But it's worth reading because what it shows you is that even this alleged paragon of altruistic virtue couldn't live up to that moral code because the moral code is completely contrary to human life. She also doubted the existence of God at the end of her life because she was so miserable and she couldn't believe that after she had done all of this sacrifice, all of this giving to others without anything in return, she wasn't happy. And so it's an interesting question. Now, let me step back and broaden this a little bit. Can an altruist be happy? Well, on one count that I've already mentioned, and I'll just reiterate it quickly, it's almost an immediate implication that an altruist can't be happy because you can't actually uphold that moral code as a matter of consistency. You can't sacrifice for the benefit of other people as a matter of consistency. Because if you did, you'd say, well, I can't eat this hamburger because there are hungry people in the world. I have to ship my food to someone else, right? And you can't live. So there's that. But let's step back and say, okay, well, let's say somebody just sort of kept himself alive, but sacrificed for other people, but only did enough to keep himself alive. You're not going to have, you wouldn't have a career that you can be proud of, that you love. You wouldn't come home every day and go, wow, I had just a wonderful day. The whole idea is you're sacrificing. If you're having a wonderful day, you're not doing that by sacrificing for others. That would be doing something that was wonderful for your life. You're giving. So let's say you want to be a pianist or a dancer, something that's just clearly in your self-interest, but you've decided to be a nurse. And there's nothing wrong with being a nurse if you love nursing, okay? But let's say you don't love nursing and you chose that precisely because it's self-sacrificial. You don't want to be self-interested because that would be immoral in this code. So now you're a nurse and you go to work every day and you're not happy. You don't like the job. You're only doing it because your moral code tells you you should do this and that you shouldn't be a dancer. Being a dancer would be selfish. So now you're going 8 hours a day, 5 days a week to this thing that you hate doing. And then you come home and you can't kick back and watch TV because that's selfish. There are people down at the homeless shelter who need soup to be ladled, right? So you have to go, okay, I'm going to go down to the homeless shelter and I'm going to ladle soup for the rest of the evening instead of doing what I would like to do. So even if you were to keep yourself alive and sacrifice only to the extent that you would make other people happy, you're just not going to be happy. But here's the more important point here. This is the really important point. Other people don't need your sacrifices. They don't. People don't need you to sacrifice for them. What they need for you to do, what other people need for all of us to do, is to use our minds so that we can all be productive and trade with each other and live in a peaceful world where people trade and get along and do well. Now, there's a very small minority of people who literally cannot take care of themselves, right? These are the people who are, for some reason, incapacitated. They either have, they're severely mentally disabled, either from birth or from a car accident or something, right? And they can't take care of, or they, you know, they're deaf, dumb, and blind, like Helen Keller, although I'll tell you an interesting story about her in a minute. But for the most part, even people with severe disabilities can and are better off taking care of themselves than having people sacrifice for them. Think about Ray Charles or Stevie Wonder. Think about Stephen Hawking, the physicist who's a paraplegic, famous author, very renowned in physics. Think about Helen Keller. Helen Keller needed a lot of help to get through her nightmarish situation of being deaf, dumb, and blind as a kid. But she did get through it, and she didn't get through it because of anybody's sacrifices. Her parents hired Annie Sullivan to work with her. Annie Sullivan was paid, there was trade going on by Helen Keller's parents to help Helen Keller, and she did. And Helen Keller went on to have a wonderful life and be an author and a speaker, and you know. So even people who are severely incapacitated like that, as long as their mind is still working, really this all comes down to, can your mind function? Stephen Hawking is a great example because his whole body, he's complete, or is it quadriplegic, I think. He can't move anything below his neck. And yet he was able to develop a career, and he's not the only one, because of his ability to think. So as long as your mind is still working, you really can take care of yourself, as long as nobody's stopping you from doing it, right? Now, when the government gets in the way and tries to stop you, or if somebody else does, that's a problem. But the point here is that you don't, like, other people really do not need your sacrifice. And as for the very small number of people who cannot take care of themselves at all because they're mentally incapacitated, what do they need? They need wealth. That's what they need. They need to live in a society where there's so much wealth that people are willing to give and able to give and completely comfortable in giving massive amounts of charity to things like people who can't take care of themselves. And the thing about charity is that when people are relatively free, as they are, for instance, in the United States, they give massive amounts of money to charity every year. In the United States, it's an interesting statistic. The amount of charity that people give to, the amount of money that people give to charity in the United States is over 2% of the GDP. It's about $315 billion a year is given to charity. Now this is over and above the 30 to 40% taxation that we have in the United States. If you were to back off all of that nasty taxation, which I would advocate, people would have even more money. We'd have an even wealthier society, and there would be more people who would have the kind of money that's necessary for charity. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with charity. There's nothing wrong with helping other people. This goes to the earlier point you were talking about. Helping strangers can feel really good. I do it. Every time there's some kind of a massive disaster, like a tsunami in some foreign country or something like that, my company, we put up a little link to the Red Cross and tell people, hey, if you can make a non-sacrificial donation, this is a good time to do it. But we always preface it with non-sacrificial, and here's why. If you're a student and you can barely pay your rent, right? You're just trying to get by. Every penny counts. In effect, if you're at that stage in your life, it would be a sacrifice to send $10 to, overseas when it would really harm your life. But the vast majority of adults are not in that situation. The vast majority of adults can easily send $100 over there, and when we do it, a bunch of people do it collectively, it really makes a difference. And people do that because it makes them feel good. And it makes them feel good because they care about people. And the thing about egoism is it makes you feel good about caring about people because other people aren't in your pocket all the time. It's not like other people are a threat to my values because they always want something. I'm always supposed to be sacrificing for them, right? This sets up this horrible sort of relationship between people where it's like other people are a threat to me because I'm always supposed to be giving up something to them that harms my life. That's a bad human relationship setup. It's really bad. But on the other hand, if other human beings are like, yeah, I go after my values, I don't sacrifice, I value honesty and integrity and justice and these things, those are the kind of people you want to be around. You feel happy around those kinds of people. You feel good around those kinds of people, and you don't mind helping them either, as long as it's not sacrificial. So these are excellent. I'm so glad you guys are a great audience because you're asking the really important questions that help me to sort of flesh out the sense that this moral code makes. Any more questions? Yes.
In addition to what you said, I would like to ask a question. But sometimes does helping include sacrifice? Because, for example, if we need to help someone in a certain way, that might require our sacrifice in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of, so it can be over-sacrifice. I mean, like, so is that possible? Because from some examples which I know in life, it is.
It's possible to sacrifice for other people.
No, but I mean, like, so were you saying that help doesn't mean sacrifice? That was my question, actually. Were you saying that helping someone doesn't mean that you are sacrificing?
I'm saying there's a difference between these two things, and that there is never a reason to help people sacrificially. There's no reason to. You can't point to facts of reality that say this is good for your life, or there's some reason that you must do this. If the government forces you to do it, then you don't have any choice. That's force. But there's no reason to choose a sacrificial course of action, because all you're doing is you're treating a lesser value as more important than a more important value. But that's a contradiction in terms if you think about it, right? If it's less important to you, then it's less important to you. So you shouldn't treat it as more important than this other value. Now, if your values are this way, let's say, this is a good way to think about this, I think. I'm a parent, and I have a daughter, and we have a limited amount of money. My wife and I only make but so much money, and my wife's a teacher, and I'm a writer, so we don't make a lot of money, but you know, we do okay. So when you have a child, you've chosen to bring someone into the world, and by making that choice, you have committed, at least you've logically committed, and you should accept the commitment. You should own this commitment. If you're going to have children, you should commit yourself to the roughly 18 years that it takes to raise them to adulthood. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I love it. I'm enjoying it, and I knew what I was getting into when I got into it. And frankly, the joy is much greater than the work, if you love it. But if you don't want to have kids, don't do it, because it is a lot of work. So when I do something for my daughter that is expensive, say sending her to a nice summer camp, when I could have used that money to maybe buy, let's make it sending her to an expensive college, rather, so then I could have instead bought a Ferrari, for the same price. And maybe I like Ferraris a lot. Maybe this is a really important value to me. But the thing is, if my daughter's education is more important than the Ferrari, then it is not a sacrifice to pay for her education. It is precisely a gain. The sacrifice there would be to buy the Ferrari and treat that as more important than her education, when that's not the fact. Now, if a Ferrari is more important to you than your child's education, I suggest you should not have had children. Right? I think you've really erred there. So that's the way I would think of that. But not almost, I would say all value calculations can be made this way, but they can only be made this way if you have your values in order. And this is another thing that rational egoism helps you to do. Ayn Rand has a whole theory about the importance of organizing your values in what she calls a hierarchical order, so you know what's more important and what's less important to you in life. And the reason this is so important is that you can't make rational, self-interested choices in life unless you have that value hierarchy worked out, right? You got to do the thinking in advance so that you know what matters most. Otherwise, you're going to make inadvertent sacrifices. You'll give up something that's more important to you, but you weren't really thinking about it, so you didn't know it was more important to you. You might, let's say, I'll give you an example. You've got a really important test tomorrow that bears heavily on whether or not you're going to graduate or get the grades that you really want. and your friend calls up and says, hey, we're going dancing tonight, come out with us, we'll go dancing, right? Now, this is something fun, you like dancing, this is, you know, wow, that's a value, I could do that. But if you haven't thought through what matters most in your life, and you go out dancing, you wake up the next day and you bomb that test, that's a sacrifice. You gave up a greater value for the sake of a lesser value. And so thinking through your values and really knowing what matters most to you enables you to make these kinds of value calculations that make your life great. And look, why not have a wonderful life? Why not fill your life with fabulous things and great people and a wonderful career and just all sorts of fulfilling things? Why not go that way? There's no reason to go the other way. There's no reason, oh no, I'd like to have a mediocre life, or I'd like to have a crappy life. It doesn't make any sense. You don't need to have a great life. You live once. You guys are young. You're right at the beginning of sort of adulthood. I mean, you've been adults for a few years, but you're at the beginning of this long chain of events that are going to unfold one way or the other. And you're in control of how they unfold. You really are. You can choose to take your life in a direction that is just awesome. Doesn't mean you don't have to go after a lot of money. Look, I love my job. I love my life. I don't make a lot of money. Money is not the be-all, end-all, right? You don't have to go make $1 billion. Choose what you love to do, whatever it is, and then make that the centerpiece of your life. Ayn Rand calls the centerpiece of your life, she says, you need a central purpose. And your central purpose is the one thing that you're going after in life that means the most to you of anything. And typically this is your career. If it's not your career, it's something like your career. It's the idea that I'm fascinated by history. So maybe your central purpose is to understand history, but your career might be to teach history. But the teaching is just a way to get your head around and be able to live this life of a historian, okay? So your central purpose there is history. And you know, if that's your thing and you love to do it, or maybe it's dancing, or maybe it's business, or maybe it's medicine, or whatever, but whatever it is, figure that out and then take it seriously and adopt a moral code that helps you to take that seriously and that helps to guide you to really go after that and to make sure that you surround yourself with wonderful people, not with dishonest people or people who are going to mistreat you. And you know, that helps you to find a relationship with maybe a lover, you know, a guy or a girl or whatever your taste is there, and you know, find a romantic partner who kind of sees eye to eye with you on this. It's like, yeah, let's make both of our lives awesome. Let's move away from this sacrificial stuff and move toward this value pursuit idea. That's really powerful. Any more questions? Yes.
When I was in the Soviet Union, my grandma was like born and brought up, and she has totally different values. And even though like it wasn't known everything was bad, like she wants to be in that period. And not only my grandma, still there are many people who are. But for us, we're brought up with a different values, and where these values come from, probably from the government, probably from people like very smart, from very smart people. So my question is like, is the government is actually like more values to us, or is this society?
So are moral values that you have now, are they coming from the government or from society? They might be, but if they are, I strongly urge you to step back and think this through, right? Because we shouldn't just accept ideas because the government or society or our teachers or our parents or anybody else says so. If ideas don't make sense to you, don't accept them. It's wrong. It's wrong on this most fundamental level to accept ideas that don't make sense. Your mind is really your most important value. And it is because it's the thing that helps you to understand the world. It's the thing that enables you to understand the world and to make good choices. So if you don't treat your mind as important, you kind of lost the game right there. So it may be that you have been accepting values because of the culture or because some government has sort of imposed them on you. But if that's the case, it's a really good time right now to challenge that idea, right? And say, wait a minute, I'm not going to do that anymore. I want things to make sense. And I'm going to demand that they make sense or I'm not going to accept them. You mentioned that your family comes from the Soviet Union.
Like, probably,
before you. Well, interestingly, Ayn Rand used to be named Alyssa Rosenbaum, and she came from the Soviet Union, and she escaped the Soviet Union right before the Bolshevik Revolution, and came to the United States, and came up with this philosophical system that is completely contrary to what she learned in the Soviet Union and what her parents accepted. And at one point, her sister came over here to visit, and her sister didn't like Ayn Rand's code of values or what was going on. When I say over here, I don't mean here in Bulgaria, I mean in the United States. She came over to visit Ayn Rand in the United States, and she didn't like it. She preferred the Soviet values that she was raised with, and she went back there. And I think Ayn Rand never heard of her from her again after that. I'm not sure what the history. I'm not an expert on Ayn Rand's personal life, so I'm not sure that I've got all of that exactly right. But the reason I bring this up is that the very person who came up with this code of values I'm talking about came from the Soviet Union, and she had a family history with those values in that system, in that family. But she said, I'm not going to accept other people's values. I want to think about values for myself. And she would say the same thing to you if she were here today. She should say, don't just accept my code of values. I'm telling you why I think they're true. I'm trying to give you evidence and reasons why I think you should accept these ideas, but I don't want you to accept them because I'm Ayn Rand and I'm up here telling you about them. She wouldn't do that for a moment. But one of the most important virtues she talks about is the virtue of independent thinking, of insisting that the ideas that you accept make sense to you. She actually had a name for people who turn to other people to see what they should believe or what they should value. And she called them second-handers. And it's a pejorative, but think about it. What it means is that you're putting the minds of other people first. You're putting them over your mind. So you're like, oh, I don't know what I should think. You tell me what I should think. So you're kind of living, if you do that, you're living second-handedly through other people. But that's not good for your life because other people don't know what's good for your life. Other people don't know what career you should choose because they're not you. They don't know what matters most to you. Right? Let's say you want, I keep using the dancer thing, we'll go with that again. Let's say you want to be a dancer. Well, only you can know that. Your mother can't know that. I can't know that. No, you could tell other people what you want to be and they could know it that way, but they can't know it firsthand. Only you can make these kinds of decisions about what's important to your life. So it may be, and I think a lot of people do. Here's an interesting fact. Almost everybody who is born into a religion, into a family of a particular religion, almost everybody stays with that religion. Isn't that interesting? There are thousands of religions on this planet. And so the fact that you were born into this one means that there's a 1 in some odd thousand chance that this is the right religion, even if any religion is right. Now, I would challenge the idea that any religion is right, because I don't think faith is a means of knowledge. I think that your mind, your reasoning mind, is your only means of knowledge. So I challenge religion as such, but it's an interesting fact that almost everybody just kind of goes with the flow. Oh, I was born into a Catholic family, so I'm Catholic. Really? You're not going to think through the philosophy that you accept? Think it through. If you were born into a family that pushed some religion on you, and I was born into a Christian family, and my dad was an Episcopal ministry, still alive. And I challenged those ideas when I got into, I didn't do it until later in life. I was a little older than you guys. I was still well into my 20s before I started thinking about these ideas really carefully. But when I did, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. It really does matter what code of values I accept. And it needs to make sense. So I kind of went with the flow for a long time. And I wish I hadn't, right? The sooner you make this conscious choice to live by your own judgment, the sooner you're going to start making your life wonderful on a fundamental level. And you don't have to, like, let's say your parents are religious or that they have some ideas that you're going to disagree with if you start thinking on your own. That doesn't mean you have to, like, break away from your parents and this is the end of our relationship. You can just tell them, look, I have a different view on these things. I've thought this stuff through and here's what I think. And here's why. And if your parents are reasonable people, and hopefully they are, they'll say, okay, well, let's do it. And if they're not reasonable, you don't owe unreasonable people a dishonest life on your part, right? If your parents can't handle your independent thinking, if they can't handle you making your own decisions in your life, that problem is theirs, not yours. You have one life to live, and you really ought to live it properly. You ought to live it by your judgment. And if other people can't handle that, you don't have to be nasty to them. You say, look, if you don't like that, I don't know what to tell you, but it's not my problem, it's your problem. And you know, you can keep the peace. My dad wasn't happy when he found out I was an atheist, believe me. But I gave him my reasoning, and over time he was like, okay, that's cool, that's your thing. And now we actually have a really good relationship. He's becoming selfish in his old age, by the way. I've turned him around. All right, do we have room for one more question? Yes.
Can religion be the key factor why a person is not successful in his life? And because religions usually preach a lot of altruistic values.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I'm glad it's the final one too. So can religion be the reason that people do not live a happy life? Because religion really does preach altruism. All of the major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, call for you to put others first. And they call for you to put God before everybody. And God is another. Otherism includes God. If you believe in God and you're saying, well, whatever God wants me to do, that's what I should do. You're putting somebody else before you. And this is a recipe for unhappiness, I think. And now, there are people who are religious who live relatively happy lives. But I think they also have a lot of guilt. They have a lot of guilt because they can't live consistently with religious scripture. You just can't. Religious scripture is about sacrifice. It's about giving up your judgment to higher power. It's about accepting the idea that faith is a means of knowledge. But faith isn't. Faith is just believing something without any reason to believe it. That's sacrificing your mind right there. That's sacrificing the most important value that you have to accept something on faith. It's also interesting to note that have you ever heard the idea that if there is no God, anything goes? Right? If there is no God, there's no morality, or if there's no God, it's all subjective. Well, here's the fact of the matter. If faith is a means of knowledge, then anything goes. Literally, anything goes. Because all you have to do is have faith that it's true, and then you're right to do it. So if someone has faith that they should fly jets into skyscrapers in Manhattan, then it's a fact that they should do that. Their faith told them to do it. Faith is a means of knowledge. It's true, right? Faith isn't a means of knowledge. Faith is just accepting something for some non-rational reason. That's what it is. And it's not good for your life, and it's not good for other people's lives either. It's the only thing that's good for your life is to say, you know what? I got one life, and I got a mind. Your mind is so powerful. It really is. What lies between your ears is a phenomenal machine. And it's not even a machine because it's got free will and consciousness built into it. It's this thing that is just unbelievably powerful, but it's only powerful if you use it, right? If we choose not to use it, if we just go, I'm going to go with the flow and do what everybody else does, then you're just going to live the kind of mediocre life that most people live. If instead you say, you know what? I'm going to use my mind to its fullest. I'm going to figure out what really makes sense for me and my life, and that's how I'm going to live. You will live a completely different kind of life. So I don't beat up on religious people in the sense of, you know, if you're religious, you're stupid or whatever. I mean, that's just first of all, I was religious when I was younger, and I can understand why some people accept religion, particularly if you're raised in a religious family. You're raised with your parents. Your parents point at a bee or a cat, and they say, that's a bee, that's a cat. And then when the idea of morality comes up, they say, yes, morality means sacrifice. Well, everything else they've told you made sense, and so when morality means sacrifice, okay, that's what it means. And we have this idea that is baked into our heads from early age because we were just told that that's what morality means. But Ayn Rand came along and said, why? Why is that what morality means? And then she started to unpack this, and when you look into it, it just doesn't make sense that morality, the code of values to guide our life, is against our life. It just doesn't make any sense. It's a complete contradiction. But it's not an obvious contradiction until you see the kind of thinking that we've been talking about here. And again, I've just scratched the surface. So let me close with a recommendation. First of all, if you love to read fiction, Ayn Rand is a phenomenally great fiction writer. She wrote 3 novels and a novelette. Novelette is sort of a novel with a different character than a typical long novel. It's short and has a few different characteristics. But the novelette is called Anthem, and it's really thin. It's a really interesting book about individualism, about what it means to be your own person and to live by your own mind. She wrote another book called We the Living, which is sort of almost an autobiographical novel about her understanding of communism and the communist country that she came from, the Soviet Union. And then she wrote a book called The Fountainhead, which is about an architect, this intransigent architect who's really completely independent in his thinking, and that fact pits him at odds with society, which is not interested, with a society that dislikes that kind of independence. And it's a really, really interesting book. And then she wrote a book called Atlas Shrugged, which is her magnum opus novel. It's a really, really long novel, and it's a story about what happens when mysteriously all of the really productive and thoughtful people start to disappear. And we don't know what happened to them for a long time in the book. But what happens to society when the thinkers start to disappear? You can start to think of it, well, what would happen if the people who produce the values and do the thinking just started to go and we didn't know where they went? And so it's a fascinating, fascinating story. And the neat thing about her novels is they weave into the story this kind of philosophy that I've been talking about here. So they're really powerful. If you're not into fiction, she's got a bunch of nonfiction. She wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, which is about this moral code that I've been talking about. And it's a wonderful read. It's not a very long book. It's a short book, and it's a series of essays. So you can read one day and then another one 2 weeks later, or whatever works for you. But it really will, her books will challenge a lot of the ideas that you've been taught. And you might not agree with everything that she says. You probably won't, at least initially, agree with everything she said. But she'll make you think. She'll get your thought processes going, and that's what matters. And if you don't agree with her ideas, you shouldn't accept them. I mean, that would be wrong. So I urge you to look into her work. I wrote a book called Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts That Support It. And it is a highly concretized introduction to Ayn Rand's ethics. What I mean by highly concretized is I give a whole lot of examples in there that sort of flesh out what this means so that you can see what it means both to give up values, to sacrifice, what does that do to your life, and what does it mean to pursue values? What kind of life does that lead to, and what are these virtues, and how do they work in your life? And I think you'll find that helpful if you're interested in these ideas. So, do we have time for one more question?
Okay.
I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
Just one question. I'm just curious if you mentioned in your book, how do you deal if you're not sure what your self-interest is? Because you're brought up in a society, our mind is suppressed by, for example, these example parents, they raise us based on their code of ethics, and we grow up and realize that, oh, it didn't overlap my ethics. But you get to the point where you just don't know, you're lost. You still want acceptance from people you love, but you also don't want to hurt them. You want to rebel, but you also want to drain those acceptance from parents because you don't want to hurt them.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's your self-interest.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question, and the answer is yes, my book goes into that in some detail. So there's a kind of crescendos to that. At the beginning of the book, it's very scientific, because I want you to see that there's a basis for all of this stuff. And then toward the middle of the book, it starts to get into what does this mean in practice? And then there's a chapter specifically on 7 different virtues: rationality, productiveness, honesty, independence, justice, and pride. Did I miss one there? And so that chapter goes into great detail about how to, and particularly the section on justice, and independent thinking. Those two sections in that chapter give a fair amount of realistic type examples about how to deal with people. And they do not, this morality does not call for you to just write off people who don't fully agree with you on something. That would be completely sacrificial to do that, especially if they're your parents and you love them. If you love your parents, yet you disagree with them on some fundamental issues, you do not want to break that relationship. What you want to do is have a nice talk with them about it. And you don't have to tell your parents everything that you think. You know, you don't have to, and you certainly don't have to, beat them over the head with this newfound philosophy. You're not going to change your parents, right? Your parents are not going to be schooled by you. I tried it, it doesn't work, right? Although he is coming around in his late 80s, excuse me. But he's not coming around because I schooled him. He's coming around because he's got some free time and he's sort of out there living it up. And I'm like, that's great, Dad, go do that. But if you love your parents, there's nothing in this moral code that suggests disrupting that relationship. That's an important relationship. You want to keep it. But there's a way you can navigate that relationship, maintain it, yet still live in a self-interested manner by these kinds of principles. And so I urge you to specifically read my book if that's one of your concerns.
We have a copy here that's going into the library, so you can check it out.
Oh, good. Okay. And I'm traveling a lot in this couple weeks, so I didn't bring many. I only brought a few. But if you, by the way, let me say one last thing. I'm not only a writer of books, and we've got that book and another one that's about to come out, and another one, two more that are about to come out, and another one in the works. But I'm the editor of a journal called The Objective Standard, and it's a journal of philosophy and culture. And there's all sorts of articles in it about art and history and economics and different interests. It covers all sorts of material, some politics, but we try to stay away from politics because it gets boring. There's not much we can do there. But if you are a student, and I think all of you are, and you want a subscription to that magazine, just send me an email, remind me, let me know that you were at this talk, and I will give you a free 1-year subscription to the electronic version, which gives you online access and access to the PDFs and all the audio. So if you like to listen to stuff while you're working out or whatever, you can do that. And I think you'll find the articles interesting. I take philosophy really seriously, and I always look for it to matter in your life. So this is not pie-in-the-sky philosophy or philosophy from the ivory tower that's useless. This is philosophy that matters if you want to live well. And the journal is written from that perspective. And we do everything from book reviews to movie reviews to a lot of what I call journalistic portraits about really interesting, fascinating people from history and how they live. So let me know if you want a subscription to that. And also, by the way, if you want a copy of Loving Life and can't afford it, let me know that, and I'll ship you one of those too. All right?